So let's kind of dive in and look at we'll look at Portal and Portalhost. So if you are building certain types of components that rely on dynamically injecting content, the portal provides basically a way of getting those templates into a host component. So there's a couple terms in here. The portal itself is just a piece of UI that can be dynamically rendered. So that can be either a component or a template ref. So if you have just a part of a template, we can dynamically inject that. And then the open slot itself is the portal host. So if you look at material design, these are a couple of the components in their library that use the portal components. So tabs, for example, have a definition where we can provide a tab and then make the content of that element the tab body. So it gets dynamically injected into the actual tab container at runtime. Things like modal dialogues. We're also going to look at another component called overlay that can help us build those as well. And then things like the snack bar, which is sort of a global alert and messaging mechanism. So we'll take a look at an example. So I'm going to reload this. So one example is something like an interstitial that shows up and covers the page. So these are usually really annoying, but if you want to put one in your app, you probably use the portal. So normally, to make this work, we want to append this element to the body, which is outside of the normal Angular context. So the portal gives us an easy way to work with those kinds of elements, so that we can actually access some of those global pieces that exist outside of the Angular context. So in this case, this is just a very simple interstitial that shows up when we first open the page, and we can dismiss it. So let's look at the code. Make this a little bigger. So we have a couple pieces in this interstitial component. There's the container component itself, which is really quite thin. There's actually nothing in here other than we emit a close event when you hit the close button. It's a very simple template. We're not doing anything fancy with the background or the overlay or anything like that. We could make this more fancy if we needed to. But it's in this case, we just have a single component, and we want to use that. This is our thing that we want to inject into the portal host. So most of the work is being done by our service. So this is just a service that has a method show and hide that we can use to display and remove our interstitial component, our container component. So if we kind of look at at this from top to bottom, we're importing the container component. We've also imported a number of components from the CDK library. I will mention too, if you're looking at the documentation today, some of these things, some of the paths are not right, and you'll see that they're importing from Angular/CDK. That was an older version, so just keep that in mind if things are not working. The documentation is still pretty new at this point. So anyway, we're importing these pieces. In this case, we're going to be using a specific type of portal host called the DOM portal host, and we'll get to that in a minute. So in our service, we've got a variable to hold the interstitial container portal, and that is it's just a type component portal, and then we it's a component portal is a generic type, so we've specified that the interstitial container component is the thing that's going to be going into the portal host. In this case, we're using the DOM portal host. So this would be, you would want to use this for attaching to really any arbitrary DOM element that's outside of the Angular context. So in this case, we're going to be attaching our portal to the body element. And then the actual component itself, or sorry, the service constructor, we're injecting a few things that we'll need in order to make all of this work. So, we're going to, in the constructor, instantiate a new instance of the component portal, and then we'll simply pass in the interstitial container component. So this is the actual the class that we're passing in, and component portal will handle instantiating and creating an instance of it. And then we're also defining our portal host, and we're passing in the body element as the element that we want to attach to. We're also using the default component factory resolvers, so the portal host will use that internally for resolving the component instantiation and so forth. So these things are pretty standard in terms of what gets passed into the DOM portal host constructor. And then these two methods here are what we'll actually be calling when we bootstrap the app to show and hide the interstitial. So what's happening in this case is we are attaching the portal to the portal host, and that's what's going to make that element visible and show up in the DOM. And we also subscribe to the event that is, or the output on the instance of the component itself. So we have an output for close. If we look again at the interstitial container component, that's our event emitter. And we can get that from the component ref and subscribe to it, and then call our hide method in the service. So in this case, we're letting the component know that the interstitial is being closed, and then responding to that event to actually detach from the portal host. So that will remove it from the DOM. So finally, in our app component, I think, is where we're using the service. It's a very simple use case. In this example, we just call the show method on the init. So that's the portal.